All right, we're live. Welcome everybody to a special pop-up episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. We've got a pretty topical topic tonight. As most people are aware, there was a pretty horrific shooting at a high school in Florida. So we wanted to hop on and talk about some really interesting stuff that technology has been trying to do, or actually sometimes hasn't been tried yet, but could possibly do to curb gun violence. So, Cody, you're the gun expert in this duo. So, what actually currently exists as far as technology as it relates to curbing gun violence?
So, there's a lot of, well, I say a lot. There's a few things that have been implemented in terms of technology. There's a lot of ideas, and a few things have been implemented. And on the other side, there's as equal a number amount of things to skirt the technology that gets invented to kind of make guns safer. So the big ones that you're talking about right now are pretty much fingerprint recognition based. So like your phone, for example, if your phone gets stolen, if you have an iPhone or if you have an Android device, if the device gets stolen, usually it's useless, as most of them are locked to your fingerprint or a passcode, or now with the iPhone 10, your face. So they have guns that are they have attachments for guns that are very similar in regards to that, where they basically have a component that covers the trigger of the firearm that drops off immediately when it recognizes the fingerprint. So it works really well for situations. The big argument against those have always been, well, in an emergency situation, you don't want to have to enter a PIN to unlock your firearm. Well, in this case, you sort of just like your phone, you grab it, and if you grab it correctly, the shield, for lack of a better term, falls away, and you can fire around immediately. So a lot of the big safety features around firearms have been on that fingerprint analysis, or the fingerprint reading technology. Same thing with gun lockers, gun safes. They are now coded to biometrics, like your finger, like your face, so people can't steal the guns. We're seeing for the first time alert systems now, where you have sort of like those first alert, the fallen I can't help, I've fallen and I can't get up type devices, where you can give these to people at stadiums or schools. And in the case of an active shooter situation, they can hit a button on a device, and it alerts the authorities and a number of people to let them know that they're in an active shooter situation. The problem with this is not so much that the technology isn't available, it's that it's not utilized. There hasn't been a gun manufacturer yet that has stepped up and said, we're going to make this part of every firearm we sell. Every firearm we sell is going to be fingerprint locked. And so you won't be able to sell it without, going through an unlocking of the firearm and transferring the biometrics to another owner.
Is the pushback there just general, I guess consumer freedom, where it should be people's choice whether they have it locked by fingerprint or not?
A lot of this is opinion based, and one of the things that really sickens me in situations like this is when things get political. So I'm trying to stay away from the politics involved with this. So a lot of that is consumer freedom, but there's a big fear on the part of the gun lobby that any sort of mechanisms that are put in place on gun manufacturers are a slippery slope to infringing on the Second Amendment. So, for example, gun manufacturers don't on their own want to put biometric locks on their devices because it's an added cost for them. A consumer's not going to pay extra for that. They would probably use it, and they probably wouldn't mind so much if the firearm costs the same, but that's not a feature of a firearm that the end consumer really appreciates. So you're looking at making the gun manufacturers foot the bill for that, so that they have no incentive to do so. Interestingly enough, the gun manufacturers have actual immunity in situations like active shooters, where, unlike, say, tobacco or McDonald's, who have faced lawsuits from people who get sick from using their products. Gun manufacturers have an immunity to that, so they really have no incentive to make these biometric features available on their firearms. And the gun lobby is going to fight any sort of legislation that would impose that that mandate on the gun manufacturers, because again, like I said, the NRA and other gun lobbies view regulation of any kind on firearms as sort of the slippery slope to banning guns or encroaching on the Second Amendment.
Well, that's why this is tough too, because that actually I'd never thought of that. The fact that there's no culpability as far as the gun manufacturers go with anything that happens with their weapons, because it actually seems like a pretty strong disincentive for them to use fingerprint technology, because then that actually introduces culpability, because if they're the ones producing the technology to ensure that the fingerprint is correctly identified before someone uses a gun, and then somebody somehow hacks around that or it malfunctions, then that really is on them at that point, that their product malfunctioned. I guess there's probably culpability if a gun malfunctions and somebody gets injured personally, but that would seem to introduce a new angle for them, which is culpability as far as somebody getting around their own technology and then using their weapon to cause harm to other people.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a weird situation where, like I said, the gun manufacturers really do enjoy a special privilege that's not really afforded to any other manufacturers in any other industry right now, which is, like you said, almost complete immunity from liability in terms of people using their product incorrectly. Whatever you may think about that, and we've kind of joked in the past about how people can sue fast food restaurants for diabetes and things like that, or suing the tobacco company for cancer. That whether you agree with that or not, those are things that tobacco companies and fast food companies have to take into consideration. And right now, that's just not something that gun manufacturers have to even think about.
Is there any other sort of, I know one technological solution was to limit the rate at which guns could fire, but there's also been technological workarounds to get past that. And I'm thinking of the Vegas shooter who had a couple semi-automatic rifles, but there was something, I think it's called a bump stock. Is that right?
Yep.
That turns a semi-automatic into basically a fully automatic weapon by somehow, it's a device that goes in front of the trigger, right?
It actually goes back on the stock, so when you fire it, it kind of shakes like an automatic,
as if your trigger, yeah,
right. So your finger is hitting the trigger almost automatically in rapid succession.
So, is there any other technology around that as far as trying to control the weapons in any sort of way? And I guess similarly, what technology has been created to get around those innovations?
Yeah, so there's the AR-15, which was the type of rifle that was used in the South Florida shooting, is a very common and very high selling firearm. It's ideal. I don't laugh at all. I'm trying to be very objective here. It's ideal for killing things. Regardless of what that thing is, it's ideal for that. And it's very good at that. And not only because it's a very well manufactured type weapon, and it has been modified. There are so many attachments that you can make to an AR that makes it more precise. And when you make something more precise, you're making it more deadly. In the case of a firearm, you have laser scopes. You have ridiculous things that have been made. I'm not saying at all that they're widespread, but literally there's been things like a mini chainsaw attachment that's been made for an AR-15. Yes, I know.
Video game. That
people are absurd. Gun owners are going crazy right now. I'm not saying that it's widespread, but you honestly can go buy a mini chainsaw attachment for your AR-15. It's all over the place, the modifications, and it's one of those things where the only limit is human creativity or human imagination in terms of how you can modify these weapons. And so the challenge is um, what is restricted, what is banned, things of that nature. You have technological advancements for struggling for the word of it, that will basically make a handgun hold 100 rounds. So there's all kinds of things.
Like an expanded clip.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of folds
Is
up
it like
around.
just a super long clip, or does it?
No, it kind of wraps around. It
Okay,
wraps around up around the handle.
like a Tommy gun.
Almost like a little Tommy gun.
Huh.
And they really are, they're neat innovations, right? You're kind of like, wow, you're making this machine. You're really pushing the capabilities of this machine. Same thing where, I do this with my truck. I add a lot of cool things to my truck, which are in no way necessary, but they're cool. They're flashy. They're impressive. Whatever it is. And I understand it. People don't understand, why someone would do that to a truck or why someone would do that to a firearm. But the fact of the matter is, people are proud of these things, whether it's a gun or whether it's a truck. They're proud of it, and they like to modify them. And most of these people are not going to kill anyone with these modified firearms, but they're using technology to make them, in a lot of cases, more deadly.
Is there anything else you want to add on that subject? Because there's another direction I want to go. So maybe if there's more technological stuff directly related to like modifications or interesting technology with the guns themselves.
Well, I mean, existing, I don't think there's much else to touch on. I mean, I'm sure there is, because like I said, the only limit is imagination. I know we have some ideas on new technology that could be implemented to make them safer. But I didn't know if that was the kind of direction you wanted to go, or
well, let's end with that. But the direction I was actually thinking of going is 3D printing with guns, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but to me, that's almost the stickiest wicket as far as gun control goes, because the ability to and it's actually, the technology now is pretty unbelievable, but the ability to 3D print a firearm seems to introduce an unbelievably gray area. Because it's, if you think about building a firearm just, from your own parts, it's hard to say that there should be a law around that, because that seems like sort of a almost a hobby. But the fact that you can 3D print an automatic rifle fairly easily, I honestly don't know what to think about that. It's the strangest thing in the world to me.
Yeah, it's and what you're talking about is a kind of a ghost gun. So a lot of places can. Okay, so what you do is you 3D print most of the firearm, and then there's a company called Ghost. I think it's called Ghost Gunner. It's not Gunner Technology, but it's Ghost Gunner. They actually come up when you're Googling Gunner Technology. And so what they will actually ship you, excuse me, is a CNC mill. And so the CNC mill will be pre-programmed. All you have to do is hit a button and it will generate, excuse me, it'll create what's called the lower third. And that's kind of the firing mechanism of the firearm. So you can basically 3D print most of the firearm and then get this lower third from Ghost Gunner. And again, they don't make it. They don't make the lower third. They ship you the CNC mill that will make it for you. So they're getting around they're getting around gun manufacturing laws by basically letting the consumer make it themselves. And it's perfectly legal. You can make your own firearm as a consumer, as a private citizen. You can make your own firearm, and that's what you're doing. But they're just basically making it a one-touch process to do so. And at that point, then you have a completely untraceable firearm. And one of the types of weapons that you can make that way is an AR-15.
And actually, I'm just reading now, California just, on July 1st, 2018, California's AB 857 comes into effect. This law requires 80% frames finished after July 1st to be reported to the California Department of Justice. So I guess there is some legislation that's trying to curb that. But I guess you're on your honor to report
That's right.
your printed weapon to them.
That's right. And it is it's not cheap. I can't remember how much the CNC mill is that will make the lower receiver. I want to say it was
$1,700. It looks like.
I would say I think it was $2,000. But so it's
$100 shipping, $1,800. Call it.
right. So you're not. This isn't now 3D printing is cheap. That's really cheap. That's the cheap part of it. It's making the low receiver that's going to run you close to $2,000. So that's the big probably barrier to this right now. If that cost comes down, you know, you really could see a lot of people with untraceable firearms, which is even for me, who I am a gun enthusiast. I like firearms for protection and recreation. I use them for both. And even that idea of a bunch of untraceable ARs being around is disconcerting to me. And I'm not saying that we need to rush out and make a law to ban this immediately, but we just can't afford to be reactive. If it's not a law to prevent or ban this type of manufacturing, we at least need technology that can help at least track these types of firearms.
Well, that's the aspect I'm interested in, not so much the political aspect, but what could you even do to track the printing of these firearms? Because you can't necessarily trace the are there DD files? Is that what you use to print the 3D print the actual parts?
Yeah.
.db files, something like that. But right. It's tough to track those because you can always use, I mean, various levels of encryption. You could even use Tor browser to send stuff with absolutely no way to track anything that's being sent. So I'm not sure how you would trace stuff as it was sent along, and I don't know that there's any way, unless you installed some sort of complete oversight over the 3D printers themselves. I don't know if there's any way to trace what's actually being printed. I'm not sure that anyone wants complete oversight of what's being 3D printed to be put into effect. So from a technology perspective, I don't even know how you get around this issue. I'm not even sure where you would start. And there's not really a question there, except for, do you have any idea what could possibly be done to counteract that?
Yeah, actually, I do. And it's maybe not... I'm struggling to find the name of it. And I think you actually turned me onto this, and I could be wrong. But there is a technology that is basically leaps and bounds better than the current technology we use in metal detectors and things at the airport, where they can measure an entire room, like a very big space, and they can draw outlines of people in almost real time in a very large area. They don't have to walk through a specific area or like a specific gate, or they don't have to stand with their hands up. And I, as you were saying, I thought it was you that told me about this, but there was an article a while ago about how these were much better than what we have now in airports, but for political and cost reasons, they didn't end up replacing what we have now. But they're just so much better at detecting non-body parts attached to a person, if you know what I mean, recognizing abnormalities on a person. So that is something, that technology is there, and it can be utilized. And that way then, so one of the things schools do now is they have what's called a single point of entry. And so the single point of entry oftentimes have metal detectors at that single point of entry. But then again, you're relying on keeping that as a single point of entry and no one finding another way around it. If you have these kind of area scanners, they can detect, at a school level, if anyone has a firearm on them, or maybe even a stadium level, if anyone has a firearm on them. And I think that's a start. I think some things like that are a start. I also think that technology that allows people to raise a red flag in terms of a certain situation are good. We kind of talked about background checks being a good one, although that's not really going to prevent these ghost weapons from being created. But if we're providing people with technology where they can easily and anonymously raise suspicion in an area, if they see something out of the normal, where they don't have to call someone, they just kind of hit a button and at least it draws eyes to that area. That's something that we can do as well. And really what we can do is brainstorm like we're doing right now, because there isn't an answer, there isn't a definitive answer. There's going to be trial and error. But the one thing we can't do is just throw our hands up in the air and say, the bad guys are going to win and there's no way we can kind of stop them. We come from a technology standpoint, and we look at technology that can help. And people in the technology community need to kind of brainstorm together. But this is a kind of a societal issue where we're going to have to kind of decide what we value. Do we, because we're talking about with technology, some may see that as a violation of privacy. Okay, so as a society, we need to start kind of thinking, what do we value more? Protection from people who wish us harm from firearms, or are we willing to give up some of our privacy to help protect ourselves from that? And I'm not trying to give an answer, but those are the types of questions that from a technological standpoint, we have to start asking ourselves.
And there's really no good answer. I mean, as far as the privacy laws go, I mean, it's just tough because you don't want to give up privacy, but you also don't want to, like if you have no oversight, then it basically, I mean, there has to be a middle ground, a better middle ground between anarchy and totalitarianism, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And we're unique as a country in the fact that at our founding, we were given the right to bear arms. Now, the interesting thing about that is, like a lot of things, technology has changed so rapidly that, what that means has changed completely. Back then that mean you could carry a musket loader where you can fire one shot a minute. And it's going to be the least accurate thing you can possibly put out there. Now we're talking about 800 rounds a minute. In the case of the Las Vegas shooter, I'm pretty sure that's what he's putting out, is 800 rounds a minute. And so, again, not making any sort of, I'm not making any sort of legislative edicts here, but you kind of have to start wondering and reconciling technological advancements in both privacy and in firearm technology, try to reconcile our Constitution to where we are today.
Yeah, I guess laws have to catch up. Well, and that's the interesting thing, though, is why, and I guess, well, that's getting into the political angle, is why laws haven't necessarily caught up.
And it's interesting because one thing that's not political at all is the reason for the Second Amendment. The reason we have the right to bear arms is to protect keep and arm a well-regulated militia against government tyranny. That is why we have the Second Amendment. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, will a militia armed with even semi-automatic rifles be able to protect us if the government turns tyrannical? And
I mean, that's where you can talk about the technological advances of the military of the United States. And I mean, that's just overwhelming at this point.
That's exactly my point. Is I'm not even sure that firearms are our best protection against a tyrannical government at this point. Our best protection against, in my opinion, our best protection against a tyrannical government or our government turning tyrannical is cyber warfare. Kind of like the militia will be hackers who are kind of keep the government at bay through technological means. I don't think anyone is going to be able to fend off a tyrannical United States military with a few semi-automatic rifles.
And just for the NSA, who's clearly watching us now, we're not encouraging anyone to do this. We're not, we don't want anyone to declare cyber warfare against the federal government of the United States. So
No,
please don't
no,
come
gosh, no.
break my
That
doors
would
down.
no, 100% not. Well, and anyone who thinks we have a tyrannical government right now is insane.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
We, despite what you may or may not think about the government, we have a pretty darn good government, and it's pretty. It affords us a lot of freedoms that we would never get a lot of other places in the world.
Uh, Geez. So it's another one of these episodes where we're just sort of, and I also, speaking of technology and screwing up technology, our live stream is a hot mess right now because I started off on Safari, didn't reset the OBS, the loop back settings so that the audio was coming. So you haven't been heard on Facebook or Periscope for a solid 20 out of these 30 minutes.
That's government censorship. That's a tyrannical government.
Yeah, I'll blame it on that. And now our camera isn't switching from me to you and from you to me. So that's also awesome.
So who's it stuck on, me or you?
It's stuck on you, so that's fine.
Oh, okay.
So before you had no audio, and now I have no video. So with our powers combined, this is a terrible episode from a technological standpoint. But well, I guess, sorry, go ahead.
One thing that we did talk about, and we've talked about, you kind of advanced the argument to the point where I wasn't ready to go, or wasn't prepared to go anyway, which is with the kind of untraceable 3D printed ghost guns. Because I had a lot of technological ideas lined up for traditional weapons and procedures that are already in place. We kind of talked about this off air, where, as we've talked about on this program a lot, is the blockchain and cryptocurrency. And a lot of people don't realize this, but one of the really good things that the blockchain could be used for, or a blockchain could be used for, is background checks, because it takes a lot of the human intervention out of